And hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to another edition of the Unslaved podcast. We're very, very excited to be here with you again and to bring back Mr. Ryan McMahon. He is a past guest on the show, and he and I actually had the opportunity a few months back to meet in person. He came out to visit me, and we had some fascinating conversations. So I was inspired to bring him back once again to continue his discussion that we started with him a while back on Unslaved. If you haven't caught that episode, go back into the archive and check it out. It was an amazing show. Today we're going to be talking about the Kybalion and so many other aspects. So we're very excited. Ryan, thank you so much for taking time to join us once again on the Unslaved podcast.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be back. You know, I love having this kind of conversation, and this type of content it's amazing. So thank you.
Oh, our pleasure. Thank you.
Welcome back.
So, Michael,
well, we called it.
Yeah, go ahead. Give an introduction to the people about this episode today.
Oh, well, just in case people don't know what the word Cabalian is, it's just a word that refers to the way to look at it would be like a 20th century update of the whole Hermetic tradition, going back thousands of years to Egypt, to Hermes Trismegistus. So when I watch what Ryan's doing, you see, that's what came to my mind is here's a guy. You're talking about ancient history and ancient metaphysics, like I often do as well. But never forget that we're on a different podium. We're not in the Middle Ages. We're not at the time of Paracelsus or Pythagoras. We're in the 20th and 21st centuries, right? So I just thought that that's what the Cabalion, the book that was released at the turn of the last millennium, was also meant to be. It was like somebody could say the work of Paul Foster Case and some other people, even Aleister Crowley, was that, even the whole theosophical movement. So I see you as part of that. I see what this last work you did, the video, and we'll put a link later on to that presentation that you did on the etymology. And it just is that's the word that sort of works for me, as a sort of a modern upgrade in applied form. See, when I hear you talking, it's like something people can take away. Your audience can take it away. You're speaking about the age-old metaphysical principle of moving from, say, a hedonic or hylic level to a pneumatic level of the magi, right? That's the way I look at it. But maybe just off the cuff, what got you interested in that? Because I look at it as key to the Western magical tradition. What is your aim in the work that you're doing, Ryan? Give us another, précis of your intentions, maybe in this regard.
Well, yeah, the Western magical tradition. I don't think I even heard that phrase until I stepped into Hermetic thinking or Hermetic philosophy, which in a simple term, I just call that holistic thinking. And I started to, there's so many different influences. I was tipped off early in my life to David Bohm, the physicist, and his approach was a critique of physics in general. And I thought it was fascinating that he would team up with J. Krishnamurti, who's I guess you'd say a metaphysician, a Hindu spiritualist, although he sort of broke free from the traditional Hindu approach, kind of tried to take a lot of the dressings out of it and just get down to like the action oriented states of consciousness and how to work through them. So I started to get into David Bohm and the physics and started to see that there are people of the scientific mind that are in the science fields and still able to think holistically. And he even had the math to prove that and to show that. And so then I started to go back further in time and started to actually read people like Paracelsus. Paracelsus is phenomenal. I mean, what little I've read of his blows my mind. And I started to realize, this person is thinking from a holistic place. And I could feel the changes in my own thinking, but in my own awareness or consciousness, that this had to be the right way, at least for me. It's very Taoistic. Of course, that's the way, right? And then it led me to all these other great thinkers. And I started to realize over time that all these people that I'm attracted to, I can't say all of them, but a great deal of them I could lump into the Western magical tradition and or Hermetic philosophy. And they would be of different approaches. One might be an architect, one might be a painter, like Da Vinci might be an inventor, basically they all have these polymathic or polymath type approaches to life. And I thought, how are these people able to do this? How are they able to be a genius, say, at math and at painting, right? And then so to try to sum that up, I realized they were all in some way, shape, or form hermetic or of the Western, the ancient Western metaphysical tradition that I would say is definitely pre-Christian. Although Christianity does adopt some of those things when you start to look into its roots, you know, basically the esoteric, the inside of the traditions, you'll find this holistic approach. And eventually it led me into language, which is really what I want to focus on this talk, if possible. I started to realize that everything we talk about is a code. It's in a symbol or a group of symbols, which you could call the alphabet, right? Or a group of images. And there's just so many layers of information in one very simple image.
Now, Paracelsus, just a quick question for you, Ryan. I mean, it's interesting. I'm just reading up a little bit on him. This is just on Wikipedia, so you're getting a really basic breakdown here. But he was also very much into health, of course, and he was coined as the father of toxicology. And if you look into Hermeticism, it's just interesting because I've been researching a lot about health and getting into that and the whole debate about whether or not health practices should be mandated by these big organizations like the WHO and the CDC and the government, et cetera, and the way that they look at health. And here we have someone that comes from the Hermetic school looking into the body and the idea that there needs to be a natural harmony between the body and nature. And, you know, when you talk to people that are in toxicology, they have a different view often. And so did you have any sort of mind explosions when you were looking into him and Hermeticism? And we're going to be talking about psychological and spiritual health, but also what about physical health? You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. What happened? I've read a bit on his medical background, his toxicology, which I would also say is basically alchemy. It's an alchemical tradition that he's coming from. That's why he's able to think in these holistic ways. He's able to syncretize these different systems. And then I realized he's also the father of botany. He was very heavily influenced by plants because of the chemical background of plants. So he's the person who termed or coined that term, botanist or botany. And obviously medicine and plants are intrinsically related. So he was able to see how plants grow and how I would even say regenerate, how a seed works, right? How does the classic phrase, how does the oak tree know its full expression when it's just an acorn? Like, how does that happen? And he was mapping all these layers of natural phenomenon from light to sound to it's the location on the planet to the rotation of the earth to the magnetic fields. At the time, we might not have called them magnetic fields, but he was still tapped into that. And then showing how all of that expresses in toxicology, alchemy, and regenesis, and then applying that to the human form. And one thing I noticed that blew my mind was I noticed that he was of the Egyptian bend. Gerald Massey talks about this a bit too in his work on Egypt, but Paracelsus was tapped into the same thing that Isha Schwaller de Lubic's expressed. And she's one of my, her book Opening of the Way is like among the most profound spiritual text or metaphysical text that I've ever encountered, and it spoke to me. Maybe not everybody would have that book speak to them, but for some reason her language, her hermetic background is actually the same language as Paracelsus's language. And so I'll jump after I explain those two are connected. I'll jump into the thing that they both tipped me off to, which was that the organs of the human body to them are archetypal. They're actually entities. They're biospiritual. And so when you really look back at mummification and you look back into ancient Egypt, and we try to figure out, well, from our modern view, like, why were the Egyptians, jarring the brain and jarring the spleen and jarring the liver and preserving it? Why were they taking these organs out? And of course, the Olmecs and Toltecs, and I mean, people did it all over the world. Even the European mummies did this, So why were they so focused on the health of the body, right, and the systems of the body, and focused on the organs? This is a really tough concept for me to even explain, but Isha does a great job of it, and she goes so far as to say that each one of your organs has not only a physical value, but a mental value and an emotional value, and thus a spiritual value. And there's energies that are archetypal that run the whole body. And so to try to bring this back, Isha and Gerald Massey and Paracelsus and others, they were all looking at the human body as a reflection of the whole, right? A reflection of the All-Father, a reflection of the cosmos itself, the Adam Kadmon, right? Which obviously Michael knows this. You guys both know this, but Michael's work on astrology and or astrotheology is exactly that huge system. The teroscopes that he does is this huge system of the macrocosm being a reflection of our bodies, the human body. And so Isha, well, I actually came to Isha Schwaller de Lubic's from R.A. Schwaller de Lubic's, her husband, and I realized, he was mapping all these things that show that the cosmos was built into the temples of Egypt as the human body. So you have these temples, like the Temple of Luxor. I think it's about a mile long, that one temple, and it was built over the course of 400 years. And you have to ask yourself, well, for one, how could you pass on that information 400 years, let's say, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 generations, and keep the message the same, keep the math the same, keep the intent the same from generation to generation to generation, from father to son, from pharaoh to pharaoh, and not fall off message? And somehow the Egyptians did this. And the way, part of that thinking is that they were all initiated into a system of thought that was holistic. And so they could build a 400-year project, and it would remain exquisitely mathematically correct as a reflection of the human form, if you were to be, like, say, in the sky looking down upon it. And each chamber, I know this kind of is going on and on and on, but each chamber is a part of the body. It might be the feet, the shins, it might be the chest cavity. And in those chambers, you'd also have the organs, or some sort of representation of the organs in that part of the chamber that you would be initiated into, or have knowledge of, and be able to apply that to your own body. You're like a spirit within the spirit that they built. And so the whole point in Paracelsus and Isha Schwaller de Lubic's and R.A. Schwaller de Lubic's and Gerald Massey and these ancient traditions that were pre-Abrahamic, as far as metaphysics is concerned or religion is concerned, was to remind everyone who was initiated that your experience of the spirit or your experience of metaphysics can only occur, like, behind your eyes. It's only going to happen within your body. So the body, the human body, was the sacred temple, or it is the sacred temple. That's part of my message when I talk about this kind of stuff, is to try to get people that are interested to stop looking so far outward, stop looking outside themselves, and realize that your experience of reality, or your experience of awareness, your experience of quote unquote God or spirit, it's only going to occur within the temple, which is you. So hopefully that gets.
Well, that's it.
Answer, yeah.
That's what that's a brilliant answer, because I say, what do people take away? It has to be something very, it's the praxis, and that's what I got out of your talk. One of the sort of virtues of it, because a lot of people can talk, and that's been the tradition in the New Age movement. But what can I take away of this? Not just reading up on the names you've mentioned, but really say, I'm the temple of God. This is why they used this. In fact, Schwaller de Lubic's book on the Temple of Luxor was called the Temple of Man. That was its translation, right? So he really was. And I think even some of the photographs that he had were laid out over the human body. We know that Vitruvius did this, Palladio did this, Leonardo da Vinci did this. Somebody would say, two things came to mind. These types of people, right? These servants of truth, or the Western magical tradition, sometimes they're known as Gnostics. And that's true to a point, just as to say that they're Hermeticists is true to a point. Yet there is a very hard divide between a real, a Gnostic in one sense and a Hermeticist as well. They're not the same, as many scholars have pointed out. Then there's the term Gnostic as we know it in what I would consider a very wrong-headed sense, about the demiurge and our world being a fallen world and all of these kinds of things. That's the classic understanding when you say to somebody Gnostic. But of course, the general meaning is the more accurate, where it's just gnosis. It's coming to the truth, well, like you said, of the macrocosm or the anthropos, right? Or the adamkadmon, as above, so below, and so below, as above, right? All of that is I accept the word Gnostic. And then you take off the G and you have noble, nobilis, right? Nos, nous, knowing things. So these are the men who knew things. And what you're doing to me, is overwhelmingly like that. So top marks for that, and we'll put the link below. But the second thought that came to mind, and this is, I know, really turning around, shifting gears a bit, but when you spoke of the anthropos, and say you speak of the androgyne, or say you speak of the hermaphrodite even, isn't it akin, and this might get us into the whole word smithery, the negative side, because remember, in the Hermetic tradition, let's put it this way, Hermetic tradition comes from Hermes. The Greek was Mercury. But Mercury is not just the bringer of wisdom and the bringer of gnosis, he's the trickster.
Yeah.
So to bring it up to the 21st century fruitcake level, what are we seeing today when we hear these gender pronouns? There's a the trickster is alive and well. Let's put it this. When you're hearing people fuck about with words like demigirl, whatever that is, they bees instead of babies.
Oh my God.
And I've said another work, it's regression. It's regressive. It's the malignant feminization of our whole fucking culture, right? But based on what you're teaching, let's look at it another way, just strictly in terms of language. The genderless language, it's really feminization, by the way. It's not genderless. That's the big lie. But just let's just meet them halfway. The genderless neuter language is a trick. Is the dark side of Mercury, in which you're taking that Hermetic principle of the hermaphrodite. The hermaphrodite is genderless. The androgyne is genderless. God or spirit is genderless. So they encode something we need. I've been saying this in my own work from day one. They insert a spiritual message, something you definitely do want, that represents the higher spiritual calling. But they bring it to you in this trendy form, right, with these genderless terms. Knowing, because these people up the ladder know exactly, and you've exposed them as well in your work, which I like as well. You're not shy with this. So they're offering you hermaphroditism. They're offering you androgyny. They're offering you to become the adamkadmon. Can you believe it? But yet it's the inverse and reverse of the entire thing we're talking about. It's the necrophiliac version. Could you maybe expand on that and comment on that?
Yeah. Now, man, I'm just going to sort of preface this. To use language to talk about.
I'm listening. I'm going to be right back.
Okay. To use language to talk about language is among the most difficult nuances that there is, at least for me. So, Michael, you were saying, Hermes is a hermaphrodite, but Hermes is also Hern, right? So before the Greeks got it, I think they probably got it from Scandinavia. Hern, which is also Cern, Cernanos. They're all the same god, right? And they're the horned god. And there's, we could go so far into this, but I'm gonna start to get into the word smithery. We're talking about gender, right? Or genderless man, right? Well, man is encoded. So what do they encode? You asked me. What I believe they encode is they encode DNA. Okay, because andro, AND, reversed or mirrored, is DNA. This is not a coincidence. This is the depth of the power language is incredibly cryptic, and it comes out of nature. It comes out of the matrix, like the mind. It comes out of these archetypes that are encoded in the human form. It comes out of the harmonics of nature. So man is andro, A-N-D, and andro, A-N-D, is just DNA backwards. So that's the code that we are supposed to get from the true alchemy, the true seekers of truth, the people that have held the path together since it became known, since gnosis was brought. Okay, check this out. Since nos, N-O-S, was brought down to the ground and put a G on the front of it. The G always stands for gravity or grave, right? The grave just means the ground. So G-N-O-S, gnosis, is when knowledge came to man. We became awakened to it. We got woke, right? And that woke, we're in this woke culture right now. And so
Unwoke.
it came down to the, yeah, exactly. It came down to the ground. And what was it? Well, I mean, that's a huge topic, but it was basically consciousness or self-reflection. And that gave birth to this gnosis, the knowledge coming down to the ground within us, within the man, the andro. So I'll kind of pause there. Now that we have this self-reflective ability, we're separated from all other animals. And so we have the code, right? The DNA, the A-N-D. And that code is both male and female, because all of nature is constantly seeking balance. And it's seeking balance because it's yin and yang, it's male and female. And so we get into this word gender, right? Well, the word gender, it means to generate or regenerate. And how does the species continue on? How does this DNA become A-N-D, or man, again and again and again and again and again and again and again? Well, we have to come together, the yin and the yang, the male, the female, the magnetic, electric, the light, the dark, the in and out, the positive and negative. We have to come together and we have to regenerate, or we have to use gender. And so this whole talismanic idea that's the New Age is doing, where it's a very gynocentric world that we live in. It's, at least if you are looking into the media, it's extremely gynocentric and or feminized. And feminization tends to make us infantile. And hopefully people don't get offended. I'm not attacking the female for that, but it's just that females are designed to nurture the baby. They're designed to put them to the early stages of the human form. So we're starting to have this talismanic thing happen where we're losing contact or losing awareness of our balance, our generation or our regeneration or our ability to gender. And so I'll make the bold statement right now that there are only two genders in the world. And if anybody listening wants to disagree, just
you better be careful. You're gonna have the SWAT team come through your door, man, and shut you down for saying that. This is the epitome of blasphemy these days. And I just want to support what you're saying, Ryan, from the perspective of studying a lot about Taoism and looking at things through the lens of martial arts and that philosophy. In certain styles of martial arts, they have a very clear definition of different types of techniques, and they will actually say, they branch them out. This technique is more of a masculine style of technique, or they call it a hard style. And this type of technique is a feminine or soft style. And they all have different ways of breaking it down, but they're not referring to gender. They're not referring to the actual physical gender of a biological male or female. They're talking about the principles in the way that in the Hermetic school, they have the 7 Hermetic principles, and one of them is gender. Everything is gender. There exists the masculine and feminine in all things and on all planes. That's why I'm glad Michael brought that up, where when they're talking about that on a spiritual or psychological or archetypal plane, to help you understand how to balance your own psyche and your own being, no matter what gender in a physical sense you are, that's to be separated from this discussion about your biological, genetic, physiological makeup as either a male or a female. Every male and every female have masculine and feminine qualities. I mean, you have a left and a right hemisphere of your brain. We've spoken about this before. It seems like our science is trying to drive us into a hard left brain way of thinking about things on one sense, in this materialist paradigm. And then in another sense, in terms of culture, they're trying to highly feminize it. So they're basically saying it's, because the right brain is usually associated with creativity and all these things. So it's easy for them to say, well, you want to be free. And this is why they call themselves liberals. We're liberals without borders or boundaries. There is no borders and boundaries anymore because it's all about being creative, expressing who you are. And if you want to change your gender every day of the week and become gender fluid, if you, we don't like authority. We don't want there to be any kind of rules. We don't respect the laws of nature because it's just all gray now. It's all gray. And the way they're arguing it is it defies the actual physical plane of reality. And they're trying to jumble up all this spiritual nonsense into their argument that actually it's taking it completely out of context. So it's creating mass confusion. And then couple that with, we were talking about Paracelsus what's his name again? Paracelsus. Paracelsus, and how he was getting into toxicology and health and understanding the connection between the body and nature and all of that and trying to harmonize those forces. Well, I mean, is it any coincidence to anybody that here we are living in 2019 and we have a lot of young people growing up completely confused about who they are physically, spiritually, in every way. And we have, for the last how many decades, we've had these big pharmaceutical industries, medical institutions, the way the medical science field has evolved or has devolved into looking at the human being, the way they look at mice and the way they look at everything else. And you go, all right, well, they've been playing around with a lot of different experiments on the human being through the different products and the different ways that they intervene medically. And now we're seeing, I think, on a physiological stage, we're seeing a lot of the fallout of that, where you're actually splitting up consciousness and you're messing with DNA and the subatomic particles and all that kind of stuff. So, when you mess around with the forces of nature and think that you can command it to that degree, I think we're messing with forces that we can't even comprehend just yet, and the fallout could be massive. Whereas the people you're talking about and the discussion we're having today is actually about how to balance with nature, not trying to command it to a point where it's not even nature anymore. You know what I mean?
Yeah, let me clear up some of that confusion. And I'm not speaking as an authority. I've just put it up for myself, and I'll share it with people. If it works for them, great. If it doesn't,
please do.
That's great. That's great too. So how do we clear up this confusion? And you're 100%, you're dead on, you're correct, right? But back to the word. I'm going to try to bring these things back to the word. Confusion, right? Con means with. Fusion. So when you're in a state of confusion, you're actually, the reason why you're off balance is because you're in the process of fusing or being with whatever it is, you're fusing with whatever it is that's causing your dissonance or your cognitive dissonance. So to be in a state of confusion is just with fusion. So to clear up this fusion, I'll go back to the symbol of Hern or Hermes that Michael brought up, or Mercury. They're all, at least in my reading, and a lot of it I got from you, at least in my reading, those are all the same archetypal god, right? And so if you look at pictures, and I know we don't have these slides up yet, but I'll describe it. If you look at pictures of Hermes or Hern, we'll stick with Hern. He's usually holding a serpent in one hand and a ring, torque, like this. I don't know if you guys can see this. This is torque, right? A neck ring.
Right.
That's an old rite of passage in that part of the world. And that, speaking of which, people would get a torque when they sort of graduated from some sort of initiation, some sort of accomplishment. And so Hern is holding a torque and or a ring and a serpent, and sometimes just a rod. So I'm gonna take that same thing, a ring and a rod. Now that's Hern and Hermes. Now let's go to Babylonia. Ishtar, the gates of Ishtar. There's the female goddess there, and there's the male god there. And what are they holding? A ring and a rod, right? And then let's go. You can go all over the world. Go to Egypt. You have different staffs or scepters. It's a ring and a rod. You have Zoroaster and Zarathustra, and you have the I'm sort of forgetting the names of these things, but you have the winged disc where I believe it's Zoroaster is standing in it, and it's really the sun with wings. And what is he holding? He's the god of all gods, right? He's holding a ring and a rod. So what the hell? What are these symbols? What were our ancestors trying to tell us in these beautiful bas reliefs with all this stuff going on? But the most powerful beings, the archetypes that we call gods, they're holding a ring and a rod. And sometimes they're holding other things, but very common, it's a ring and a rod. Well, what is the rod? Well, that's the phallus. That's the male staff, right? And what's the ring? Well, that's the vagina. And they're telling you about Genesis, the gene of Isis, the way in which birth comes through the female generation after generation after generation. And the gods are basically telling you, again, that the human body is in fact the temple of God, and you need men and women to come together to make babies if you want to survive. If you want to experience God or spirit, the only way you're going to do it is in the temple, which is in the human body. The only way that you're going to keep doing that is to have babies or have a new generation to generate. So the gods are showing us that the ring and the rod is the male and the female coming together. And you can see this once you start to look at symbols and become symbol literate. You can start to see this everywhere. You can see it in the ancient pictures of Christ, who's inside the Vesica Pisces, right? Well, he's standing upright. He's like the ring, and the Vesica around him is the vagina. He's literally coming out of a vagina. So this symbology is so ancient. Now,
and also, just sorry to cut you off, I just had a mind explosion. I just looked at the power symbol on my laptop, and it's a ring and a rod. And
it's a ring and a rod, exactly.
That's
exactly right. That's exactly right. So I'll go into math real quick because I want to talk about, at some point, I just want to at least get this open so people can dig into it themselves. Is, you know, Paracelsus, all these people studied holistic thinking, right? And we look at things like phyllotaxis, the way plants grow, the way they generate, the way seeds generate and regenerate, the way that all seeds well, not all seeds, most seeds generate, they need to be in darkness, right? Half the plant is in darkness in order for it to come out into the light. There's that as above, so below, that yin and yang, that genesis, that regenesis, that balance. And we have a symbol for that. And we would call it a Greek symbol, but it's much older than that. And it's the phi symbol. And if people don't know what phi is, there's two different kinds of phi. But we'll just stick with not to get complicated. It's a ring and a rod, right? It's a circle, which stands for the female, the cosmos itself. And then there's a rod that splits it, and that's the male. And there's a reason why it's split, because this symbol encodes everything that the Hermetic Western tradition, alchemical tradition, Egyptian tradition, and even ancient Babylonian tradition, it encodes everything. It encodes life itself. It's a split, right? All of creation is this combination between formlessness and the thing that's created, which we would call form. And so we have this duality, right? We probably get into Hegel, the split with Hegel, the dialect. All of this is encoded in this symbol of phi, and phi is the most common ratio in nature. So our ancients, once we became woke, once we woke up to this, we had to encode it. We did it in huge temples that are the human body. We did it in pyramidal structures that are the fire. The pyramid is the pura, P-U-R-E, or A, means fire, to purify. We put it into that symbol, and we put them all over the world, and every, like, all these cultures have these pyramids, and we don't even know what they mean. It's in there. And not only is it in the pyramid, all math is based on phi and pi, right? Because it's mapping our connection to the earth we live on and to the cosmos above, right? We figured out that the same geniuses that knew that the organs had biospiritual resonance and mapped the human body, well, they also mapped the human body in the pyramid with the math that they used. Math, meaning matter, mother, matrix. It's all a code, right? And I try my best to boil things down to some sort of symbol, right? Some sort of thing I can carry with me in my mind so that I can remember where balance is. And so far, what I've gotten from the Cabalian, the Kabbalah, right? Kabbalah, three different aspects of the soul, is this one symbol. Now, there's probably symbols that go beyond it that I'm unaware of, but this symbol of phi, this splitting of consciousness, is a representation of creation itself, our body itself, and our biophilic, our biofeed, our biospirit, and connection to everything. So it's also, so this is a large leap for people that haven't studied etymology or language or symbols, but it's actually, believe it or not, the same thing makes plants grow, phyllotaxis, in that ratio, the phi ratio. It also affects the way human beings create scientific language. And I know that seems like a large jump for people, but when you start to look deeply into the Hermetic thinkers, the holistic thinkers, they began with creating a system known as the alphabet that was not arbitrary. It was created solely based on its knowledge of the phi ratio in nature. So our alphabet, the symbols that we use to make up words and have this conversation we're having right now, is literally a harmonic. And it was created by genius people. I'm not sure exactly who they were, but they encoded it in things like the Cabalion. And that's why the Bible has codes. And that's why because the English alphabet is coded, and the Hebrew alphabet is coded, and the Greek alphabet is coded. I know it's kind of a big, long stretch, but what's important is to realize that the human body itself is a harmonic code of nature. And in order for us to make it through this time that we're in, we're going to need to come back to the yin yang. We're going to need to come back to the balance. We're going to need to come back to the generative gender of generating, right? Of making new life. And what you were speaking of is a perversion of our language, where they're saying, and same with you, Michael, where they're talking about doing away with gender by trying to make it fluid. Obviously it's postmodernism, right? It's all these pseudo philosophers. I think most of them are French, and they basically are Marxists, right? And they're doing away with what all of our ancestors knew for, I definitely say, thousands of years, possibly millions of years, that got us this far, that got us here today into this new technocratic state. And so I'll finish this right now. The language that we use upholds our reality, right? Carlos Castaneda explained that. And right now we're stuck in a language given to us by the people that control media. And it's basically a technocratic language, or a highly technical language. And the problem with technical language is that it at least in the modern world, is it negates biological language. And they've reoriented it to where technological language is supposed to be have priority over biological language. And that's wrong. If we keep going that way, our biology is going to suffer, and we may end up dying as a species. It needs to be the way that our ancestors have taught us, which is your biology is life. Duh. Bio, right? Meaning life. So if you prioritize biological language ahead of technological language, then you'll be living in a much greater state of balance. And cultures that did this are the ones that got us here. And we need to heed their wisdom, and we need to listen to them.
Well, I like you when you talked about the letter G there. It's interesting. And you also speak about the meaning of the letter D in this sort of esoteric concept. A lot of people never even know that the alphabet is esoteric, because since the tale of selling fish or doing some other mercantile nonsense back in ancient Greece, it became mundane. It was made into the mundane. So what we're talking about here is something much higher. And of course, I made that point because just to make sure that people know that this esotericism is being used by our controllers. So when there's this spate of genderless, neutral words being used, especially gender pronouns, it's an occult ritual that's being used upon us. Now, they tried this in the early days of Christianity, didn't they, with one of the commandments where it forbade graven images. Now, some people have taken that. Yeah, some people, scholars who have looked into this, like Leonard Schlein and others, say, well, there you go. There's the emphasis on letters and writing. They wanted us to stop painting pictures. And you know something, that's true. Graven images usually just generally means hieroglyphics and paintings and pictures of divinity or whatever. But he's also wrong as well, because letters are images. So
Yeah.
as eminent as these people are, they're not talking what you're talking about. You know, they have big fucking degrees from Cornell or whatever, and they've missed a whole point here. And that is that letters are symbols. When you use even words, those words are only of value because they, you know, symbolism, they turn into symbolism and they make you conceive of a particular image. So graven images is back, even with the words that they say, oh, the Hebrews wanted us to just use words for God and to write. And of course they did. Torah, right? Quran, right? Quran. It's interesting. There's two different spellings of that word. We get into so many things, but the point that you're making is, look, the letters are bloody symbols, right? So maybe you could talk about letter D and maybe comment on that as well.
Yeah. So let me jump and tell you where I got this stuff. The letter D, for example, comes out of William Lawrence Lyons. And this book, I wondered if you guys were aware of it. I don't know if you can see this book, The Language Crystal.
No, I'm not aware of it.
Okay. This book is out of print, and I had the very fortunate, really odd luck of interviewing this author. I thought he was dead. But when I read this book, this is another one that just blew my mind, because I didn't realize there was an esoteric structure to our alphabet. And he discovered a code, and that's where I got this whole thing, D and the letter G. Real quick, to answer your question, the letter D, according to William Lawrence Lyons, is a word that is kind of like, it creates an ending. It creates a finality to whatever word it's being used on when it's basically when it's at the end of a word. It's like closing a door, and that's why door is sort of the door of the alphabet. And so when we put the letter D on the end of a word, it's showing that we've completed something. So for example, the word see is an action, like I'm seeing you, or I'm trying to see. But once we've completed that action and we actually have seen, we have a vision. It's now we contain it. It's now ours, right? We've completed the vision. It's called a seed, because that just generated a whole new concept, right? Concept. Okay. I know this gets really confusing, but concept, con means with, and sept means 7, right? A septenary or a scepter. Why is it a scepter of power? Because the people that wield the scepter understood the harmonics of nature, and they realized our body is encoded to see and hear and feel 7 colors in the rainbow, 7 visible planets, 7 days of the week. None of that shit's arbitrary, right? That's all. Our ancients gave us that. Nobody even stops to think, why is there 7? Why is there not 9 days in the week? Why isn't 13 days in the week? It's because our body is encoded this way, because the body, again, is the temple. But anyway, the letter D closes a word, and we don't even realize that when we use it. The letter G brings something down to the ground. Gravitas. That has gravity, has weight, right? And every letter, there's a code here. Well, this is the wrong page, but every letter was decoded by William Lawrence Lyons. And when you read this book, it is incredibly difficult to chalk this up to coincidence or imagination. Or I don't want to. There's too much working consistent. It's scientific. You can use the scientific method and see that his uncovering of the code is, in fact, there's some substance to that. Now, I don't want to say that he was the first person to dream this up, or to, I should say, uncover it. I think he either was intuitive enough, or he was able to read and somehow contact our ancestors that wrote and designed and built the symbols of the alphabet to make it esoteric. And when you study gematria, you start to see the interrelations between letters and numbers. And so I urge people to read this book if they can find it. It's out of print right now. It's like 500 pages long, but some of the things that I learned from there is that the letters that we use affect our deep psyche, because because this is how we are as human beings. We're conscious, so we self-reflect, and so we created these letters and we use them every day, but we don't realize their psychological and spiritual effect upon us. And so we need to kind of like take back speech, and we need to learn how to speak. We need to learn epistemologically, like, what is truth, and then we need to use, as Ayn Rand would say, a psychoepistemology, right? We need that just means a way in which we program ourselves, the way in which we use our own symbols that we all agree upon to use to program ourselves to manifest, or let's say dictate reality, right? What does dictate mean? What is a dictator? One who controls, right? So you get to dictate with diction your own addictions. Okay, addiction is a negation of diction, right? A at the front of a word is alpha privative, which means it negates the meaning of the word that it follows. So addiction is when you are no longer dictating consciously your reality. Now you're addicted to whatever habitual patterning that you're doing. You're no longer conscious of your word. You've fallen into addiction, right? So how do you come out of addiction? Is to remember to dictate your reality, become your own dictator, right? And so that is basically psychoepistemology. It's a program. You program yourself. You reprogram yourself. And words, the reason why I'm so focused on language is because as you guys know from my last talk with you guys, is a great deal of my life was dealing with pain, like body struggles. You know, my temple was struggling. And so I was given a couple mantras by one of my teachers early on in life, and I didn't even know what a mantra was. However, I decided to use it because she was so impactful in my life, and I realized millions of iterations later that her mantra actually helped me heal. Okay, I just took that leap of faith and did what she told me to do because I knew that she was a true person of the heart, you know, of the way. And then I realized, oh my God, my own language is in fact, it could be the most powerful tool that I have for healing. And like, we're not taught that anymore. Like we're just barraged with words and barraged with symbols, and we don't dictate our own anymore because it's just so overwhelming. And so we need to take back our own speech. We need to use mantras that are positive, that are holistically minded. We need to learn how to self-reflect in order to see the truth and then seed it and then speak it. And so I'll go one step further and go, when we look back at all of our archetypes of pretty much every tradition that I've ever studied, the heroic ones, the warriors, the kings, the pharaohs, the gods, the goddesses, there's a couple things that all our godlike archetypes have in common. There was a Freudian slip there. Condom. Again, to condemn, right?
That's why I was just going to say condom, condemn.
See?
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's not a coincidence. But here's the things that they have in common. Is that all the masters are able to see all around them in 360 degrees. They're able to see on all four directions at all times, right? That means they're at the center of the universe. The other thing that they all have in common is that they dictate and or change the universe with their speech. So Krishna plays a flute, you know, Jesus is the word, right?
The logos.
The logos, exactly. And obviously that comes out of even pre-Abrahamic. There's right. Other gods that are the word, right? I mean, you could just name any one of them. You know, Marduk sings the world into existence. And this is why like prayer and song are a part of religious tradition. It's or a mantra, when you're singing with your heart and mind connected at the same time, the resonance, and I mean the literal vibratory resonance, reflects phi. If you're in tune, right? If you're singing in tune, then it actually reflects phi, which is the building block of all of nature, and you're actually singing cymatics. And for those who don't know cymatics, it's the geometrical forms of consonants that happen when you hit a note that's in tune with reality, right? These notes, you can literally sing the world into existence. And I found this to be true because my teacher, 25 years ago, gave me a mantra, and she didn't tell me to sing it. But when you repeat something 1,000 times in one sitting, it becomes a song, or you begin to create a rhythm. You begin to you end up in phi, whether you like it or not, because your whole biology starts to resonate with spirit, and all of a sudden you find balance. And so,
well, it makes sense. Sorry to interrupt you there, but it makes sense because if they're going to argue in the materialist paradigm that all of this stuff is just random chaos, or it's this there's no real purpose to anything, right? They're trying to negate consciousness. They're trying to negate everything you're saying in the materialist paradigm and boil it down to just cause and effect or whatever, in a particular way. That, I mean, explain then how certain music, when not played in tune and it's out of chord and all of that, it just sounds horrible. You want to plug your ears, you want to walk out of the building. Whereas other music produces emotional responses and is actually life-changing. And like everybody knows the song that when that song comes on, something happens to you. You go back into a memory. You go back into a place you were in emotionally. You go back into a totally different way of seeing something. It awakens something in you. That's what good music or good art or good literature, all these things can produce in you. So you can't explain then through the paradigm that we're being handed in schools today that whole phenomena. Like who comes up with a new song? I mean, Michael, you're a songwriter. You write music. You play the music you play. Actually, funny story. Last night I was on the way home. I brought my girls out, and they were getting chaotic. They were tired. They were screaming. They were upset. They were fighting with each other. And I turned the car on, and automatically my iTunes flipped on, and I had your one of your albums on, and the guitar music started playing, and I started driving. I just said, okay, I'm just going to ignore this, let this rest on its own. And within a minute, my girls quieted right down and just started to relax. So kudos to you, but there's something soothing. Something about the music changed that frequency of chaos that they were in. So how do you explain that through conventional terms? I just don't think you can.
Well, earlier you spoke about polarity. I don't know which is you, Ryan, or David, but polarity is very important. It ties in with everything we're saying, because you can have innocence and ignorance, right? You can have God and the devil, right? You can have rational and irrational, pure and impure. This, like I say, earthly and spiritual, alpha and omega, right? But it's all polarity is of one thing, right? So we sometimes, we can think of polarity as being severed. No, polarization, like on a musical instrument, right? Say the low note, right? Then the high, right? Or whatever. On any scale, or even the ones of gender we touched on earlier, there's one thing, and then there's the polarity of that, the sliding scale, like the alpha, the ultra violet and the infrared, right? So in some sense, there is, on one level, there's no division, and yet there is division. So the phi ratio for me, and the work of people like Schwaller de Lubitsch, a real sage is to bring that out, that there's the illusion of polarity, very much the trickster aspect. The left brain would be, the prime culprit here, because something within us is, I'm touching on this in, say, the idealism program, right? Something within us has conjured the illusion of dualism, diabolus, right? Diabolic means to divide and to split. Symbolic, it means to bring together. I can't remember the Latin terms, but people can look it up. So again, diabolus is dia, or die, like you said in the dictate, is to separate as well, to divide down the middle. That's where the word divide comes from. And symbolic, or symbiosis, means to bring together. So there's one part of our brain that wants to look at the divide. And whether there's even a legitimate reason why we need to do that, coming up close to the canvas, the left brain throws us right into the grounding of reality, survival needs, and then the right brain is more speculative and imaginative and intuitive. But even leaving that aside, one part of us, the left brain, does see the parts, and one part of us sees the wholes. So the sage has to do both, like Ryan is saying. There's a reason for the one, because we need to survive. Right? Even St. Paul said, first the natural, then the spiritual. Because if you're sitting on top of a stylite in the middle of the Syrian desert, contemplating the crown, singing to yourself, you're fucking dead, right? It's over. Your connection with other people, your natural empathy. So I'm against this Eastern aesthetic, or even it's crept into the West approach, because that's getting up too close. Oh no, sorry, that's being too vague, too right brain, right? Then there's the too much left brain of the man who's in that noise that Ryan talked about. You're in the cacophony. And so it's all just a big jumble. And then what happens is you start to realize, like a materialist really does, who's the most insensitive of all people, they just go with the flow, right? Because what they're really wanting to do is negate will. You said consciousness, I would say will, but they're the same thing, obviously. When you're not using your heroic will, then you got determinism. Determinism is a fancy, philosophically colored term that just means a willless fuck. Who's just waiting for the crowd to you can't bring fucking meaning from within. And then you color it up by some philosophical materialism. If you're a heroic person using your will, there's only free will. There is no determinism. Determinism is the negation of consciousness, negation of will, right? But the thing that really made me, the end of what Ryan was saying is this. I just got into a digression about, polarity as being polarities of a single unit, right? Maybe you can comment on that. But there was one anecdote that really jumped out from the end of what you said there. And as I see, criminals, right? People who are very, very habitual, some of the worst criminals in the world. It's an absolute psychological fact noted by, people, criminologists, that the more the criminal, the worst ones, the recidivists, some of the most violent people on our planet, the more they learn to communicate their feelings or just communicate in general, they have no more time for crime. This is universal fact. So take that to the spiritual side, right? So something about you, of course, we know that if you use better language, it helps with your self-image, and that's probably a lot of it too. There's probably some very generic reasons for this, but there's also a sort of an esoteric seed implanted in that when I learn to communicate who I am, what I think about, just to act, right? Like you said, the mantra, there's another kind of mantra, language itself, speaking, communicating with other people on the Hegelian basis, getting to know them, finding out the mystery of what's inside them. Language crosses the barrier between self and other, and helps us penetrate the mystery of another, even if it's an object, but mostly we're thinking of human beings. So it crosses the divide of the mystery. I don't know what they're thinking. I don't know who they are inside, and they don't know who I am. So we've invented language in a way. And this is backed up by this anecdote about criminals, because in the language, it's reciprocal. It's bloody empathic. They think they're just working on their, doing their projects, doing what the doctor told them to do, and getting to be a better reader, better communicator, without realizing that's bringing you closer to people. You're learning about them, so you're willing to violate them less. The criminal doesn't know this until maybe way down the end when he's just worked on moving the blocks. But he's actually in the communication. The doctor knows I'm bringing them closer to the human world. I'm bringing them closer, to human beings. So there's a tremendous empathy involved. And that's right brain, not left brain. So it's just to hard divide those polarities is a mistake to a degree, because there's a synergy and a call and response between hemispheres. Spirit does not talk to us in words. Spirit sends us images. So we have invented language as a way to communicate with one another, and also to communicate with spirit, because we've understood that something more numinous is in fact communicating with us. That's how pyramids get built. That's how language gets created. That's how numbers work. So you're completely right, because we've understood that spirit is the first communicator, the one who animates us, sends us ideas, sends us inspiration, sends us passion, sends us the music and all the rest of it. Then we have somehow, in our own little sort of infantile way, wanted to emulate the communicative skill of spirit. And I think that's how the esoteric aspect of language came about,
Yeah, there's so much in there. There's so many things that you said that just go ping, 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 like I'm trying to remember them all. As back to you as well, David, I'm going to try to get on both of these. An interesting antidote, to the criminal mind, I bringing them into the language of being human, right? It makes me think of this the word in Latin for now, in the present moment, now, is I-A-M. I guess you would pronounce it E-M or I-am, right? So it's not a coincidence that if you were to say I am now in English, you would write it I am. Okay. And that's basically the fundamental, tagline of Hinduism is I am that I am, right? And that's what the Rastafari are trying to say when they're communicating with another person, they say, yes, I, or I and I, which is basically, I recognize that I am here, which means I recognize that you are here now in this present moment. So we are human and we are connected, right? And I guess you could take the New Age term namaste, which I hate that term. I don't even like to say it, but, it basically means that all recognizes myself in you or you in me. Well, I am means it's that human thing. And if you can get a criminal mind there, if you can lead a criminal mind into that space, then maybe they will feel all these emotions, all these feelings about their criminality, and maybe they'll have an impulse to grow or to change. And that makes me think of the work of Thomas Szasz, who I would have never found if it weren't for you, David. Michael. He said something that I used in one of my talks. Let me see. I think I have it here. Let me see. He's talking about mind and language, and he says that mind gives rise to language, but it's not language itself. And what he really ends up saying is that psychoanalysis, and he was a psychiatrist, so he could prescribe drugs, and he was actually trying to help a lot of people, some of them criminals. He was helping people change their mind. And that's how he had the greatest success in healing. It wasn't by prescribing them toxic drugs. And that he was a big advocate against pharmacology in psychiatry. And that's kind of why that is why they marginalized him, and maybe very few people know of his work. So I'm going to read this real quick and see if this speaks to this. Mind is dependent on language as respiration is dependent on the lung. However, mind is neither brain nor self nor language, but the person's ability to have a conversation with himself. The self acting as both speaker and listener, the I and the me, speaking and listening to one another. And then he goes on to say that psychoanalysis itself is a language art. And when I heard that, I was like, psychoanalysis is a language art? What the hell does that mean? And so I realized he was helping people with their psychoepistemology. He was helping people learn better behavior by changing their internal dialogue, changing the way that they talk to themselves, changing the symbols that appear in their mind. And where do we get criminal symbols from? Well, I don't think we get them from nature. I think we get them from the perversion of language, where man is trying to control nature. He's perverting the symbols, because as I hold the stance that all of our symbols really are natural. They come out of nature. If we're speaking those symbols, we will be biophilic. We will have a love of life, and we will still have a technology language or a technical language, but it'll be in its proper place. It won't supersede the language of biology. I'll say it like this: all of our technology came out of the human mind, right? So we created these ideas, and these ideas became things in the real world, and we wield them as technology. And so that process is biology creates technology, not the other way around. So our language should be dictated by biology. That way our technology will be always in check, and we will use fire for what it's supposed to be used for, right? For bettering life, not for burning down our enemies' houses. So the whole idea that psychoanalysis is a language art is just a phenomenal insight that I got from Thomas Szasz. And he's so aware of the way psychology and psychoanalysis works. And And I don't know, I just found that fascinating. And so, yeah, so that actually makes me think of, you know,
he did use that term, didn't he? Auto something or other, autolog. Autolog was the term. And the way he saw it was that the chicanery of psychoanalysis that came later was to take a very natural thing, as you're saying, conversation, and Freud then technicalized it into something that was somehow extraordinary and different, when in fact it's just replicating one's own autolog. And I think he was trying to say that we have lost that, wasn't he? That because we are lost our self conversation, we're now insane. There's psychosis, neurosis, is the shutting down of this inner dialogue. So again, that's a huge piece there, because remember, pertaining to what I was just saying, that if left brain has invented language, the good part is because it's trying to simulate what spirit does with us, but the bad side is to gain control. The good side, in other words, to find out what others are thinking. The bad side is to get in there and change their thinking. But but connected to what we just said, it's the right brain then that it's the right brain that what's what I'm looking for? Imposes is not the right word. A meaning on the word. So like A is the pyramid, right? C is that crescent moon. O is the shape your lips take when you say that letter. M is water. Z is lightning flash, whatever it may be, right? But in even in modern terms, language letters, and when I say a sentence to somebody, that is the construction of the left brain. But the meanings we associate with a word, with a letter, even with a symbol, since letters are often a symbol, we've already established that. But it's the right brain that is still preserved in attributing the meaning. Right now, the left brain splits off from the right brain in order to, in some sense, simulate right brain activity, right? Because there's a barrier, right? There's something, the demiurge, there's something wrong, right? That the left brain can be considered the egoic mind, right? That in some way wants to completely distance itself from the spiritual and the imagistic, but it can't, because then it is emaciated and it fails, its project fails. So it has to remain plugged into certain right brain or spiritual principles. So really, you're seeing the whole meaning of life in language and in letters, right? Where you've got the physical letters and the metaphor of language, but then the metaphors themselves come from the right brain. Like you said, it's very hard to explain to people who are not familiar with this. So there's some very really weird entanglement taking place here, where there's a deep antipathy in the psyche. That's what creates that divide in between the hemispheres. But yet they can't completely divide, because then there's fallout. The left brain doesn't have the octane. It needs to have at least some threads, some roots connected to the antique mind and to the deep symbolic reservoir that lies within. So what we're seeing now in our life, say, and here's one example then to make it concrete. If I use a word like unconscious, right? That's just describing something that could be completely different than the description. So what we've done in our modern world is we've taken descriptions of things by the way of language for the thing itself. But the thing is not the word, right? It's not. In fact, the description is not the action. Huh? What?
Yeah, the map is not the territory.
No. And also don't confuse a description with an action. Now there's a lot of things that are happening, you see, that is confused. It's just like you're trying to say that there's something, it's almost like the word, in rather than revealing the meaning of a thing, can actually equally conceal it. So language can be like the trickster aspect, and they're using this hugely today. That's why it's so important for people to get on top of this. Not to mention the fact that when you talk about letters like D at the end and G at the beginning, our corporate advertisers are using this constantly in their logos. So, I've done a whole thing on the letter E in the past. People need to be realizing how these letters are being used. But getting back to the point, the whole concept of language has this trickster mercurial element, and where, although you think it's revealing, in other words, bringing you closer to a person, connecting you with spirit, but a lot of that can be on paper. The trickster element can also be that it's obscuring reality. So an example I gave, if you say the word unconscious, now I'm talking about a part of your own being. For all you know, it could be the spiritual part of your being. But because I've given it this one term, we go, oh, it's just the unconscious, not realizing that this is just a word that has an enormous talismanic effect on our minds. Isn't that correct, Ryan? What do you think of that?
Yeah, no, yeah, yes, no. Look at me saying these words just like that. Yes, no, of course, I agree. Rudolf Steiner said it like this. There's a quote I have up. Conscience, what man first listened to as the voice of God, to that he now listens as an independent power in his own mind, which he calls conscience. And so there's that self-reflection. That's what separates us. That's why we even have knowledge, right? Animals don't have knowledge, okay, because they live predominantly in the instinctual world. Okay, so we have and carry knowledge. Steiner is pointing to this, and there is polarity there, like you were just talking about. How do we deal with that? And the way in which Alfred Boyd Kuhn, as well as William Lawrence Lyons, talks about the way we deal with our own tree of knowledge, or our own gnosis, is we do it with language. Like we have this tool that separates us from other creatures, and thus we have to be responsible for it. And so one of the examples one of the examples that William Lawrence Lyons uses to try to explain this is the word danger. So when humans experience danger, what it is anger, which is the root word, anger, with a D in front of it, right? Danger. And what the D does, and that at the beginning of the word, it's a doing. At the end of a word, D completes something. At the beginning of a word, it means doing, or it means action. And so danger is the doing of anger. Okay? But no animals can experience danger. I'm sorry. It's the other way around. No animals can experience anger because they're just in an instinctual mode. Or you could say, I guess I should say, either way, what he's trying to say is that when an animal is in danger, it doesn't have the emotion attached to it of anger. It just instinctually acts, right? Fully right brain, you would say. However, when people experience danger, we have a word for it. And so we encase our emotion into a symbol, or into a few letters that we call a word, which is a symbol, and we call anger danger. And the reason why we do that is so that we can revisit our feelings at a later time. And I know that sounds really strange, but animals don't do this. All animals have language, just like we do, but we're the only animal on this planet that has taken our language, abstracted it into symbols, and then manifested it in the material world. So for example, if everybody looks around right now, wherever they are, I guarantee you, there's a letter in front of them or a symbol in front of them somewhere. It's on my computer. You know, I got Dell, and I got all these words in my house, and all these words everywhere in my house. We made those words. We put them into the physical world. Now they live there. Okay. Now we're doing what Rudolf Steiner is saying in that quote. We're dealing with conscience. We're self-reflecting on our own word, our own symbol that we created. Now it lives in our external reality. We interact with it constantly. Animals don't do this. So what I'm trying to say is that when we experience an emotion of like anger, we abstract a part of it and encase it into a symbol so that we can come back at a later time and process it, or revisit it, or learn from it. And this whole thing, I'll finish this up. This is probably the most important part of that I got from Lyons, is that the reason why we do this, well, since we have the ability to do this, it actually gave us a perceptual awareness of time. And he says that animals don't have a perceptual awareness of time like we do, because they're not able to abstract their language. because they don't even have symbols. They don't have language to abstract. So what he's trying to say is that when you take a feeling that's happening right now, you abstract it into a symbol and you put it out into your world and you forget about it for a time, and then you happen to see it again. Now you remember it because it's in your world now. And that right there created a perception of the past. Human beings woke up one day once we started to develop symbols, and we went like, oh my God, I remember putting that symbol there. I remember putting that stone there. I remember carving that into the tree. I remember etching that onto the ground, and now I'm back. And so what that did was that triggered our perception of the past. And then once you have a perception of the past, well, you have no choice but to speculate about, well, what happens next, right? So now you've created a future. Okay, and herein lies, again, the conscience, the self-reflecting, the split, the polarity, the dialectic. Human beings have no choice but to live in a world of time. And animals, we think animals don't. They don't really live like that. They don't perceive the passage of time in an abstract way. They just live in it, right? And so I'll finish this up by saying, we've encapsulated that whole thing into one word. Everything I just said there into one word, and that word is present. Everybody says, "Hey, you know what? When you just need to be present." Be present simply means stop your internal dialogue, because as Castaneda said, if you succeed at stopping your internal dialogue, your entire world stops, and then a new world. Rumi said, "A new world, a world anew. A world becomes new." Stop language, or change your language and change the world. So when you're present, the reason why you're able to stop time being in the now is because the word present literally means present. So when you're actually in eternity, because eternity always is. It's everywhere all the time, always. And so when you're present, you're literally in the space known as present. The universe itself is present. So language falls away when you're in the present.
Well, like St. Paul said, right? Like when he said about the natural comes first, then the spiritual, right? Mm-hmm. And he was talking on the most gross, mundane level about needing to eat, needing to survive, and then you can contemplate the cloud, the stars and the greater mysteries. Mysticism is absolutely seeing and being with a thing as it really is in the present. So I completely concur with that. As soon as you say the word mysticism, just look what happens to people's minds and where they go. Just like when you say the word Gnostic. But actually, you can even give it a new name, phenomenology, right? The phenomenologist doesn't know he's a mystic. I mean, look at the state of it. Yet mysticism was phenomenology centuries ago, in which I'm with the stuff of the world, and I'm there in a sort of comportment in which the thing is revealing itself to me, partly by way of a name, but I've given it that name, like you say. Everything named is named by us. Then we forgot we did that, and then it returns to us to consolidate what we know about it, or to continually revisiting it, without realizing it. In our actual naming of it was the complete knowledge in the initial state, right? And then we have to go back and hear it again and again, sort of recapitulation stroke consolidation aspect. And this is the mechanism of the left brain. But but we should take a short break. I want to come back with something to ask you, Ryan, about the really positive aspects of language, like say on the empathic level. But can we just take a 2-3 minute break to get some coffee?
Sure.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
Because I know we started kind of crazily. Okay, great. Be right back.
Go ahead, guys.
Okay, cheers.